Good afternoon and welcome to NCIA's Industry Essentials Educational Webinar Series, our premier digital platform featuring a variety of programs to provide you timely, engaging, and essential education when and where you need it most. My name is Brian Gilbert, the events manager here at NCIA, and I'm very excited to welcome you all to another episode in our ongoing NCIA Committee Insights series, and the very first being hosted by our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee this afternoon. If you're just joining us, please be aware we will be conducting Q&A at the conclusion of the presentation, so don't hesitate to post any questions that you have throughout the session to the Q&A board. You'll see it along the bottom toolbar in Zoom. Even if you don't have a question to contribute, please do engage in that by giving an upvote to any questions that are particularly worthwhile. And yeah, we'll dive into those at the end of the session. So now let's dive into today's session. This afternoon, members from NCIA's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee will discuss directly with stakeholders in Illinois about how their social equity program has or hasn't been working, and how the failings and successes in Illinois thus far will impact other social equity programs around the nation. Thank you once again to our audience, and a special shout out to all the NCIA members in attendance today. And with that, please enjoy today's session entitled NCIA Committee Insights. What's going on with social equity in Illinois, and what does it mean for the rest of the country? Being moderated by Tahir Johnson, Business Development Manager, as well as the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Liaison here at NCIA. You've got the room, Tahir, take it away. And all the panelists can activate their videos and unmute themselves now on cue.
What's going on, everybody? This is Tahir Johnson, Business Development and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Manager here at NCIA. Before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Scholarship Program. Right now, any social equity applicants or licensees anywhere in the country are eligible for complimentary membership here at NCIA. We're going to have some great educational programs, some great stuff from our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. This is one of the first webinars a lot of you guys are getting a chance to see. And also there's going to be an opportunity to apply for seats on each one of our committees. The application period is open until application 1st. All of you that submit your applications, I have got them, I'm approving them, and you will be getting the email from me very soon, so be on the lookout for that. Let me tell you, we have a great conversation today. Some of the things we're going to talk about. So Illinois is the first state in the country to have a social equity program with, the first state in the nation to approve adult use and have a social equity program baked into the legislation. We just heard, I just read that the market did $47 million in revenue last month, yet there's still a delay in licenses. All the social equity applicants are still waiting to hear, to hear what's going on. We're going to talk a little bit about the 51% ownership issue and what that looks like and what that means, and predatory partnerships. We're also going to talk about what people should do to prepare for the next round and some of the lessons that some of our applicants and advocates learned, and some of the things that people from around the rest of the country can learn from what's going on in Illinois. So I want to get started by introducing our 3 members of NCIA's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. First up is Christine. Christine is the co-founder of the People's Dispensary, a fairly sought-after national social equity model and enterprise with locations in California and Oregon, and still growing. She leads operations and strategic direction with responsibility from bottom-line factors, including long-range planning, product management, and retail development. Christine is a social entrepreneur who spent most of her adult life building businesses that creatively engage and employ the local communities that surround them. Mark is the CEO of I Comply. Mark works in the specialist sector of compliance in the medical, retail, and hemp industries and has over 12 years of experience in the cannabis industry development, consulting, and operational compliance, and over 21 years experience in regulations and risk management. Mark worked on over 20 applications for Illinois, incorporating an innovative approach to social equity that integrated creative concepts and lessons learned as a government consultant for Puerto Rico, where he developed and implemented the fastest free market model in Spanish. As a Brazilian American, he's passionate about inequality and integrating opportunities domestically and internationally for Latinos most impacted by the war on drugs. Mike is the managing partner of Dow Mastery. Mark started out in the industry over 20 years ago when there was no roadmap. His firm, Dow Mastery, provides coaching, consulting, and mentoring to help others find and navigate their own sustainable roadmap in the cannabis industry. Dow Mastery, with its deep Chicago roots and deep cannabis legacy roots, founded Boost in 2019. Boost is a social equity accelerator launched in Chicago with a focus on creating strong ancillary businesses, either to stand on their own ancillaries or use the ancillary pathway to become sustainable operators. I'm going to hand it over to Mike and let him introduce our guests from the Chicago community.
Thanks, Tahir. I'm really excited to be able to bring on our special guest from the Chicago community itself, actually doing the work on the ground in Chicago, and hopefully going to be able to have a great dialogue today. So starting out with Michael Malcolm, the founder and cannabis consultant for WTF Media, which produces digital media content for cannabis, travel, and food industry brands. WTF Media sheds light on the historic period of the end of cannabis prohibition and helps cannabis companies better connect with their customers by educating the public. Michael has over 20 years in real estate and has been with at Property since 2012, and is also had the pleasure of working with some of the most influential people in Chicago. Michael is also a social equity applicant himself. The Reverend Anibal Vega is a United States Army veteran and licensed and ordained minister with over 26 years of deeply committed service to his community. He served as a 12-year highly decorated member of the U.S. Army Infantry Airborne Unit and was honorably discharged in 2010. He has served as a pastor in Chicago for the last 15 years and is the founder for Community Development Initiatives, a violence prevention and intervention program for youth, veterans, and families, and has been their executive director. Anibal is also a social equity applicant in Chicago. Kay Villamin is the co-founder and creative marketing director of Hush Chicago, an events and marketing service agency servicing entrepreneurs, startups, and small businesses in the cannabis community of Illinois. With over 10 plus years of experience as photographer, designer, brand strategist, and marketer, Kay is passionate about using the skills under her belt to help cannabis navigate the new industry, and do so in a way that to create more purpose-driven brands in the space. And Kay Hush is also a social equity applicant as well in Chicago. Ron Holmes is the co-founder of Majority Minority Group, who has spent his entire career trying to persuade others to see his way. As a Southside Chicago native, he has been recognized for using his persuasion skills to help his clients navigate the political halls of power, media, and electoral process. Now, Ron's working to stand up for a cannabis industry in Illinois that is successful as it is diverse. He currently serves as the chief lobbyist for Cannabis Business Association of Illinois and is a co-founder of the Majority Minority Group, which is a values-driven company that aims to create more minority-owned businesses in the cannabis space. Thank you. So I'll hand it back over to here, and we'll kick off, jump right into some Q&A with our community members.
All righty. So the first question I want to ask is for Mark. Mark, based on you submitting 20 applications in Illinois and your experience in the application process in other markets, what's a major improvement that you'd like to see in the permitting process to benefit social equity applicants that the program's intended to impact?
Sure, thanks. And just first and foremost, thank you, NCIA, and my fellow DEIC members, folks on boots on the ground, of course, the attendees out there for joining this, I think, very important discussion. So it's such a new concept and a very complicated one. So I'd say the first issue for social equity applicants in general in Illinois is just having untested, unproven grounds. We had 610 pages of legislation that really dictated exactly what social equity meant, exactly what the regulations were. And on top of that, 200 plus pages of Q&A and regulation that was promulgated after the fact. So it left a lot of unclear, I think, definitions about sort of what we needed to see for social equity to happen. And then we had 50 automatic points. So if people qualified by either being a family member or a person convicted of a minor enough drug offense with cannabis only, nonviolent, they were allowed to be a social equity applicant. Same thing with someone that just hired 10 people that were working 35 hours a week and at least employed as of the day of the submission of the application on a full-time basis. But those owners could never have lived in Chicago and still qualified for those 50 points. And we also had, of course, the disproportionately impacted areas, which I think you had to live a certain amount of time in over a certain period of time and prove that residency in that area in order to qualify. So I think it's going to create some issues just in terms of being able to score this, because there's not a lot of nuance in terms of the qualification of the social equity applicant to be able to have the sufficient control that's necessary. Employees that were hired, but only for day one and then fired subsequently afterwards, especially as we wait right now for results and we keep getting delays. And being able to, I think, prove the consistency in being able to live in a disproportionately impacted area. And the only tiebreaker that was kind of presented in the application itself was a 2-point nuance for the community engagement plan. So if you're going from, we all get 50 points to, here we have 2 points to try to discern who's going to win in a tiebreaker, they're going to have, I think, some challenges that maybe they didn't anticipate when they created this application process. And I'd say in the process itself too, because of folks that may be not allowed for poly drug offenses, not allowed for having firearms and marijuana as a past criminal offense, or anybody that was convicted in another state, a nearby state to Illinois, for example, they and also their family members who were impacted by the war on drugs are not qualified for the program. So we left a huge chunk of people out. And I think the most important thing for me was that the loan program sort of came dovetailing in and after the actual application process. So if people don't have the means, the money or the education or the knowledge or information by which to participate in the program itself, then they're left sort of in these predatory waters where a lot of multi-state operators and essentially sharks in the industry are looking for their token minority, their token social equity applicant. And they're essentially, we're seeing a lot of operating agreements that leverage them back out if they aren't able to come up with their money for the program. I'm almost thinking if we had done the loan program first to qualify people as social equity applicants, would have saved a lot during the application process, as it would have just been positioned elsewhere. And then that person could have had the tools, the education perhaps provided by the state in order to really come to the table with these consultant agencies, with the multi-state operators and say, no, look, I've got my money covered because I've already been pre-approved for the loan program. I think that would have been much more helpful, especially when you look at the processing, the grow side, where we're already having to shell out money for possession of premises, which wasn't the case on the dispensary side, which kind of created an inequitable application process anyway, not to mention that growing and processing generally tends to be a little bit smaller of a micro business in some of these cases that could have been more available for folks if they didn't have to hold on to the rents. So it put people already in a disprivileged sort of position of powerlessness, I think, during this process. And I think if we're going to do social equity loan programs, which I applaud, by taking revenues from applications and from taxes on cannabis, that we pre-qualify those folks first, so that then they're in the power position by which they can attract the operator partners that they're going to need. So those are just some of my thoughts on what the process, I think, had challenges in, and where I think there possibly could be improvements as we look towards social equity markets in the future.
Right, and those are some good points that you brought up there, and that actually leads me to a question for Ron. Hey, Ron, if you're a 51% owner, how is your value determined? And do you think there's a disconnect between the law as written and is it practical?
Yeah, so the reality is that Illinois, by putting this 51% threshold out there, the intent was to make sure that people had true ownership and control. What we've seen in other social equity programs across the country is the notion that either A, you'll have someone that is a phase 4 license and then the license gets flipped immediately, or B, you have a situation where there's a narrow pool of licenses and you're trying to make sure that the people most qualified actually receive them. Certainly Illinois was aiming for that in the 51%, but there's also some realities as it relates to how individuals that haven't actually been operators in the past can have A, the resources to fund their businesses, but B, the actual organizational expertise as well. So, my understanding is that the administration is supposed to be combing through operating agreements. Often we see that, someone is 51% on paper for, the actual, front company, but then there's an operating agreement that dilutes them down to 5–10%. My understanding is the administration is supposed to be looking at that, but how they do that and how they say whether or not someone is in a predatory relationship or not is a real gray area that is truly going to be litigated.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's a good point. It definitely is all in the operating agreement, and it's important for people to understand what's going on when they're negotiating, especially with these larger multi-state operators. So Mike, I read your story about, your experience where you had been approached by someone and it's just kind of something that sounded like a shady deal. What would you say are some of the things that social equity applicants should negotiate for and ask for in the contracts? Like, what are some things they should look out for? And what are some things they should keep in mind if they are negotiating a contract with a multi-state investor or outside investors?
Yeah, so thanks, guys, for having me. So yeah, I was interviewed about that very issue I had actually two different situations where I had a company in the dispensary round that wanted me to, what they wanted me to do was, I think they wanted me to, basically be a front for them, just truly be a front for them. They had some really convoluted way that they approached me with it. They were like, well, we would give you, you would only get 5% of the dispensary, but we would put you down as the majority owner, but you would get 5% of all the licenses that we have around the state. It just sounded shady to me, so I didn't go through with that, obviously. And then there was another situation I had with another MSO during the cultivation round where they basically flat out told me, they actually were stupid enough to put this in the email, that they actually wanted me to to say that I was 100% the owner, and then I would sell them 80%, agree to sell them right up front, 80% of my ownership in 2 years. Obviously, I didn't agree to that either. But I think like some of the biggest things for me when I was going into my negotiations was, and I think all social equity applicants need to be aware of this, is that number one, that these MSOs are not doing this out of the kindness of their heart. And most of them aren't doing it because they necessarily even believe in the social equity, the need for a social equity program. They're doing it because they're mandated by the state to do it. So you have to understand that when you go into your negotiations, that these people are not necessarily your friends. And the reason I say that is only because I know I've spoken with other social equity applicants since we've all turned in our applications. And I know some people that didn't even have an attorney to review the paperwork that they signed with these MSOs, which for me as a realtor is insane because you can't do anything in Illinois without an attorney.
That's right.
So you just have to. And so for me to hear some of these stories, I wish the best for everyone, but I wonder how much control that they really have. I'm open with saying I partner with Columbia Care on my dispensary application. And while right now I can pretty honestly say that I'm satisfied and I got 95% of the things that I was looking for as a applicant, the terms that they initially offered me were not at all in my favor. I mean, they weren't they didn't even have a job for me at my own dispensary. So I think that it's good for the applicant to know what they want, but it's even more important to find an attorney. In my case, I found an attorney who was already working in the industry for a large MSO. And so he had kind of seen how deals were structured in the past in other states. And then he was able to walk me through when my term sheet initially came through, he was able to walk me through it and explain to me what I should be asking for. Again, certain things I hadn't even considered, like having a job. I didn't even notice in my term sheet that they didn't have that in there for me. So how do I make money owning the company, right? It's very simple, but there's so much to read. It's very easy to overlook things. And so your attorneys are just invaluable to you. And then the last part of that is just making sure that, you do your best research and try to understand, at least on my end, because I've been kind of working in the industry anyway, is learning how other social equity applicants have failed in the past, and then kind of learning from their mistakes moving forward with your own negotiations. That's pretty much the best side, because I'm sure everybody's term sheets that they're going to get from MSOs are going to be different. But I think the biggest thing is just to know that these people aren't necessarily your friends. It's all business, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you have to understand that that's the perspective that they're coming from. So we need to approach it from the same in the same way.
So something that's great to share, Mike. I really appreciate hearing all that. I know that's been a big issue. I know that Anibal, when we were talking recently, you mentioned some issues that you've seen the social equity applicants struggle with specifically. Do you want to maybe go into detail on any of that stuff? Yeah.
Well, thank you for having me. You know, just as my brother Malcolm was saying, Michael was saying, you know, I've also was approached, you know, by several other, you know, organizations trying to get me in, and then also the same process. But I want to add something as we're talking about 51% ownership, and me, and I know some people are saying, well, you know, he's a pastor involved in this industry. One of the things that I took upon when I looked at the People's Dispensary was really, as a social equity applicant, is doing research on those organizations that are coming to you, and also looking at the value system. But when we're talking about, you know, communities, disparate communities, a lot of the individuals don't know the ins and outs. They don't know what a social equity applicant is. You know, they don't know those process. You know, we're much more fortunate because we've been involved or we've done research. But when we have individuals that these larger corporations come to and say, hey, you know, let's find the saddest story, or let's find a person that's in such need that let's monopolize them so we can get that equity applicant in there so we can monopolize them and take them. You know, the thing is, it's all about education. And in communities of colors, when we only have certain individuals that are knowledgeable, not everyone is knowledgeable of how this process works. So there's a big level of disenfranchisement and also predatory to social equity applicants. For me, it was someone that I knew that said, hey, you're a veteran, you're Latino, you live in the Auburn Gresham community, you know, hey, why don't you sign on with 20 other people and we'll give you guys like 2%. And I'm like, you're crazy. You know, I'm not signing on with 20 other people because, as you know, if you're in a household of 4, you can't even agree. If you're in a household of 4, imagine 20. So the thing is looking at that aspect, is looking at how we as a coalition or as individuals to provide that policy or the information to communities and say, this is what social equity is compared to how it's supposed to be by law. And we know these industries, as Michael said, they're not really your friend. I mean, I'm fortunate for the People Dispensary. We have this mesh and we have this value system. And I think Christina and I, we spoke for about 6 months, you know, just to make sure that we were the right fit. It's not always about, you know, do I fit on paper, but do I fit for the environment of the culture of the company, and what's the best interest of my community? That was the thing that I came on as a minister. Is I'm on the south side of Chicago. Ron, you know this, on the south side, Auburn, Gresham, West Chatham, vacant lots, not a lot of economic opportunities. So I became a partner so I can advocate for people to get jobs, and not only to get jobs, to say, hey, how can we put you in the industry as people of color so that way you can grow your wealth and build in your own communities?
Yeah, it's actually kind of crazy because you know, we filed applications for people on January 2nd, and you know, we talked to a lot of people during the process, most of which we quite frankly didn't even work with, but they were asking us different questions about the law, and we're like, yeah, whatever information you need. And it was amazing how many people were at the Thompson Center, which is where the applications are filed, that were like coming up to me and like, hey, how can I file an application today? And it's like, well, the process has been open for 3 months. This bill got passed 6 months ago. Like, you can't just like hop into this, right? And like the research that you just alluded to is so important. But the information sharing is something that, you know, clearly like to hear you guys are doing today, but we've got to continue beating that drum over and over again for the next application process.
Absolutely. And I also think one of the things that's important is to consider the role that ancillary businesses play, you know, in the application process in the industry. Kay, I know you've been doing a lot of things with Hush there in the Illinois area. What's your experience been like, and what kind of challenges have you faced as a person of color operating in the industry?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. And this just piggybacks on what everyone has been saying before me, Mike, Annabelle, and Ron, about finding the right partner. When my business partner, Vanessa, and I first started Hush in 2018, we became heavily involved in the local cannabis community in Chicago. We attended events, we learned about advocacy, volunteered at expungement sites, attended workshops, did a lot of networking. We wanted to see how we can be of service to Illinois as we also began preparing for the recreational bill and the social equity program to roll out. We knew for sure that we had the combined skills and experience that we had in event marketing. We could help a lot of people, especially those in the legacy and traditional the ones entrepreneurs in Chicago who are interested and deserve to be part of the new market. We wanted to help elevate those existing brands and raise the standards here so that we can better represent Illinois. A lot of eyes were going to be on us, right? But we also knew that we ourselves needed help with navigating the new industry, especially in fully understanding the policies, the language being used that we were unfamiliar with. So finding the right help became one of the biggest challenges for us. It wasn't that there was a lack of people offering help, but it was filtering through people or companies who had other agendas. So the bill that rolled out was overwhelming. On top of that, the criteria for the application was daunting. So if you weren't used to that kind of verbiage, it's enough to make you want to quit right at the start. The information provided when you go to town hall meetings or on the website were inadequate. So we knew we couldn't do this by ourselves, but it did take some hard lessons to learn that not everybody who offered to help us had good intentions. And it wasn't until we met Mike Lamuto, who is on this panel, and his co-founder Vernon Speller of Boost, which is an accelerator program geared for legacy businesses and equity applicants, that we felt that we finally found people who aligned with our individual and company values, people who were just like us, but who were more seasoned in the business, in raising funds, and they were more knowledgeable of the cannabis laws than we were. So with their help, we were able to reach clarity in our goals, to be a better support to the cannabineurs here in Illinois, and to be a better support to fellow social equity applicants. We gain more confidence in applying for the license and navigating the policy so we can be better equity advocates ourselves. So with all that said, there's a lot of hurdles in getting to where we are now. There's still a lot of hurdles with the program, and as we continue to experience challenges with the delay, I think it's essential to have the right people and partners at your side in the whole process.
Right, and you know, that's absolutely critical. Partnership is so important. And so Christine, as somebody who's on the opposite side of the transaction, you have the People's Dispensary. You know, you're a multi-state operator. You've gone through social equity programs in California and in Oregon. You know, what would you say are the differences between like the programs you participated in, and from your perspective, what does it mean? What's the difference between being predatory and being a good partner? Like, you know, what are some important points there?
I think it's important well, first of all, thank everybody in the NCIA for inviting me. And I always think it's important to start off with what we did wrong, right? Especially in terms of even just the People's Dispensary. I remember the first time we went to a lawyer to get an operating agreement put together for our social equity applicants. When we got it back, it was a predatory contract because that's what they had been doing for all of the larger companies. We're a small company. And we were horrified. We were like, oh my God, like, what are you doing? And we had to spend quite a bit of time with them, explaining to them that we were actually trying to be of assistance and to be in partnership with our social equity applicants, as opposed to being just be a front for me, just be this. Like, we wanted to be able to engage with our social equity applicants, teach them how we learned, because we come out of the traditional market. So when we came into the regulated market, we knew traditional methodology and how to sell weed. And we had to learn so much so quickly as we transitioned into the regulated market. We knew that even if you were not in the traditional market, if you were a social equity applicant coming into this market, the level of expertise needed to run any one of the vertical, like whether it's cultivation or retail or manufacturing, it's a big curve. And so one of the things that we've been working on and continue to work on is how we put together our workforce development for these social equity applicants so that they are on top of their game as they try to employ people from these communities that we come from, and make sure that they are successful in doing so. And so what we have to do is not just partner with social equity applicants and look at them as a pathway to get a license and make more money for the company. We have to look at them as partners and pathways into the communities that most need cannabis, that most need the income from cannabis, and most need the jobs. And I think this is a place where a lot of the larger MSOs really miss that point, because they're really just looking for the person that will help them get the license, but not really looking at that person about how do they engage and create culture for my brand? Because every state has a different culture. Even every neighborhood in cities have a different culture. So when we were out there looking for social equity applicants and we were trying to find somebody, as Annabelle said, we spoke for about 6 months, was really making sure that we were aligned and that Annabelle would be able to comfortably partner with us and understand what that means, meaning getting trained, understanding every aspect of the business, not being pushed to the side and saying, oh, you don't really need to know that, but really understanding how does the money work? How does the buying work? How does the marketing work? How do you do CPG in a place where there's not CPG because we can't go across state lines, but to get prepared for that, all of that things so that he himself can go teach his community about, hey, I'm going to teach you how to become a procurement director, right? Because you've worked at a Walmart or a Target and you were a buyer for them, but you don't want to be in that industry anymore. How do I take somebody who's never, ever, ever smoked weed or never, ever, ever sold it? How do I teach you to be a bud tender that is a connector to the communities? How do we teach them to do that? And so you have to have social equity applicants that want to do that. And you as a company have to want to engage the community where you're planning to set that dispensary down. Because the People's Dispensary in Oregon is different than the People's Dispensary in Oakland. It'll be different than the People's Dispensary in Chicago. And I'm gonna tell you, people need to wake up because we are about to come into a hyper localized economy. We were a global economy 9 months ago, and now I can't even travel back to my home in California. So we're gonna start to see hyper localization, hyper localized spending. So if you don't have that community engagement, if you don't have the people that connect to that community and that culture, you're going to lose money. And this is why social equity applicants are more than just a 51%, more than just getting you in the door, more than just they are literally the lifeline that's going to protect the cannabis industry in about 3 or 4 months when the entire country possibly goes on lockdown. And you are only able to shop within 10 miles of your home. You better have that community engagement. And that's what we're really working on. And we've been working on that since we started, not knowing that we were going to be in a pandemic.
Right, definitely. And it sounds like a common theme is good partnership and actually working together with people that are authentic from the community. You know, Mike, I know that you, like Kay mentioned, you partnered together with her, and you also have partners in your company that are born and bred there in Chicago, you know, and you had your accelerator and incubator program that you operated there. You know, what do you think, as someone that operated a partnership, what do you think are some of the potential limitations of incubator and accelerator programs?
Yeah, thanks to hear. And thanks everybody for this conversation. I wish we could go on for like 3 hours because I'm just like listening to everybody talk, and you know, this is awesome. You know, a lot of people on the same page here. So, you know, with accelerators and incubators, right? I mean, I guess first off, just for the sake of everybody, you know, so we're on the same page, there's a few different types of incubators and accelerators, right? There's the type of incubator that's created by like the big company, the multi-state operator, like, you know, and then there's the ones that are, you know, smaller incubators or regular incubators from traditional industries that make the crossover into cannabis. And then there's incubators that kind of pop up that use government funds and things like that. So there's different types of incubators to start out with. And you know, I want to kind of piggyback off of what Christine was saying here, is that a big limitation with, I think, a lot of the incubators that we see is that there isn't necessarily alignment with the people that they're trying to help necessarily. And, you know, I think that, you know, if we look at them traditionally speaking, a lot of the people spearheading these incubators weren't necessarily, you know, always supportive of cannabis necessarily. They weren't necessarily always supportive of you know, folks that were disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs, the social equity applicants themselves. A lot of times these incubators are created because of pressure, or sometimes even in certain states because of the law actually requiring it, and other times to make money. And so, you know, just like with Mike and Ron are mentioning with a lot of the predatory stuff that goes on, I think a lot of times incubators, you know, can kind of come across that way too. And so trust is a big issue. And if you're in an incubator, as Kay mentioned, you need to trust the people that you're, you know, incubating with. And to Christine's point, you know, the incubators need to be able to look at the social equity applicants, the people that are helping in the incubator, as partners, not simply as, you know, hey, we're just doing a charity for you. So that's one of the biggest, you know, detriments that I see with a lot of the incubators out there. You know, something to mention is that, you know, wealth takes time, right? It takes time to build wealth. And a lot of these incubators, another pitfall with a lot of them, to be quite honest, in my opinion, is that they're really very short term. you know, relatively short term, even though they might say, you know, 3 months or something like that. That's, you know, how much time is that to really help somebody in creating wealth? Especially when one of the biggest things, and to Christine's point again, the mindset of an entrepreneur, the mindset of a business owner, the mindset of a regulated cannabis operator, all these things have to be integrated into that person, into that team. And that, I think, takes a little more than 3 months of maybe once a week or, you know, an occasional webinar or something like that. So I think that those are the pitfalls and of a lot of the incubators that we see out there, is that they could use a lot more alignment with the communities they're trying to serve, and they could be themselves a little more robust. What I'd like to see is, you know, really that mindset being something that is really integrated into the curriculum on a deep level. I'd like to see a deep alignment and commitment to the communities that the folks are that these incubators are trying to serve. And I'd also like to see, you know, to Kay's point earlier, and I think I've seen a couple things in the chat here about ancillaries. You know, especially in a state that like Illinois with limited licenses, if you go through an incubator and you don't win a license, what happens next? And a lot of times the result is you now can get a job in the industry, but do you build wealth that way is the question I pose. And so, you know, I think that a lot of these incubators, if you're somebody looking to either be an incubator or to join an incubator, you look at what's the alternative you're going to present for the people in your program if they don't win a license in a competitive state, and be able to still be successful for the long term. And I think creating ancillaries is a good pathway for that. So that's what I would throw out there.
Well,
right.
Yeah. And I would like to add real quick, and let's look at the systematic practice of approach, right? So let's look at the systems that we all have to look at and build coalitions and then advocate and build policies. So I'll give you an example. You have 51% applicant. You have a company that says, hey, I have a 51% applicant, but nowhere in the state of Illinois does it say, hey, we're going to take these 75 licenses and we're actually going to do social equity for Black and Brown owned businesses. And we're going to take 20 of these licenses and award them directly to companies that really present Black and Brown communities, right? Not just say it was a competitive thing, but let's look at even the loan program. How can I get a loan if my credit's messed up? Right. So let's look at these disadvantages. Instead of giving a loan, then let's identify companies that are Black and Brown that have a viable business plan, that have a viable backer, and give it as a grant. So then that way they can say, hey, you know what? We're going to give you this $50,000 grant or $100,000, $1 million grant, but this is the contingency. As you start growing, you have to pay it forward. Now you have to put it into a fund. Give you a perfect example for those that are and Ron, you probably know this too. The Safe Peace Grant to address violence in Chicago. You got 15 to 20 different philanthropic organizations that put money in. Those are grants to the communities, right? But then they also talk to the applicants that once you get awarded, we need you to pay that forward. Those are things that we can look as advocate as 51% social equity applicant. That eliminates a lot of predatory. If there's a guarantee that out of 75 licenses, 30, 40% go to the right minority owned businesses that are really building relationships in communities, true social equity applicants, automatic. Grants that go to these minority Black and Brown owned businesses so they can build up the wealth. And then also as advocates, because I have a master's in public policy and I'm an advocate in the community, then let's look at the policies to make sure to break down the systematic mentality, as you said, Mike, about these industries. We have the prisons, right? We have to break systematically those mindsets, and we have to also break the systematic mindsets of larger corporations that they look at Black and Brown communities as token. You know, I'm a big South Park fan. You know, they always got token around in the episode. You know, so that's what they look like to us. Is we're tokens. If I can get a Vega to do the 51% equity applicant, come in, tell my story to a Shark Tank of individuals that are predatory investors, and then they like my story. I can't read well, right? I'm looking at a contract, don't have a lawyer. They tell me I'm 51%, but in 6 months I go down to 1% after the license, and then I'm buy out within a year. There's no building wealth.
Yeah. They don't even help them apply for the loan.
Right.
This is what I have as an issue of just everybody gets 50 points. No, to your point, Annabelle, there's a shaded nuance of gray areas in there of how socially equitably contributable are you really being, and whether or not you're trying to shoot your partner in the foot with predatory practices. So it's great that they're reviewing operating agreements, but if the empowerment there isn't there with an attorney or grant money to get them started to pay for an attorney to understand what they're applying into in the first place, then you just don't have the knowledge to be able to go, oh, that agreement they wanted to put in a safety deposit box that's super secretive that they didn't tell the state about, I should know that I have leverage against them to not be doing that kind of practice. And there are definitely conversations where that came up and social equity applicants didn't know the difference because they were just looking for a sob story.
Right.
But in the world of compliance, that's a reason to lose the license for that business partner that tried to pull that off, or that MSO.
Well, and
The other side of this too is I was just gonna say from my experience, the other side of this is you have to explain something to privileged people that don't understand. Right? There are qualified MSOs that may have compassion in their heart and just not know any better because it's not the language of business. And that takes taking a little bit of an extra mile when you're a person of color in a consulting position.
Yep.
You got to breathe deep sometimes, have a little bit of patience, but really being able to get that message across to change that mentality with our personal stories, with what we know about our communities, what people have been through. So I think it speaks to the human heart and the condition, but period, that should be on a spectrum of judgment, not 2 points on a community engagement plan. That's going to be like flipping a coin on how many of those 2 points you get.
Absolutely.
To tie break when everybody just got flat 50.
Right. And
Yeah,
also
and that's, sorry, I just wanted to shift here. I was thinking, you got me thinking there. I thought it was a good segue into something that I wanted to ask Ron that came up in our discussions earlier is, about, moving forward, right? This is, in Illinois right now, this was just phase one. And they'd kind of staged everything in Illinois so that they're going to release, a set of licenses in phase one, set of licenses phase two, set of licenses phase three. And other states right now are watching everything that's happening in Illinois also to see how they do that. And this question really is for anybody, but I know that Ron had some thoughts on this earlier that, if you want to share right now about, what would you like to see in round two? What would you like to see as improvements for phase two, or that other states can really look at and say, hey, here's some things we could learn from what's happened in Illinois so far?
Yeah, so before I run through a Bible worth of things that the state could have done differently, I do just want to acknowledge the fact that we're all here having a discussion about Illinois' program is a good thing in itself, right? So while the bill is far from while the implementation hasn't been great, right? Because I think that's where a lot of the holes have been. There is a framework here for us to all move forward from. So as far as what wave two looks like for me, I talk about incremental growth, especially as you don't have certain infrastructure set up. I know specifically in the Black community, that's an issue, right? So I want to see Black and brown people win licenses this time around that may not have had all the expertise that they needed, but I want them then to open the door for folks that are going to apply during wave two and say, here's what my experience has been. I know you were thinking about a dispensary, but federal legalization might be coming, and I'm sitting here with this real estate license. You might want to push for delivery instead. I want that conversation to be the one that happens. I want there to be a more concentrated effort at realizing that education has to be done up front about the application process and not do technical assistance during the process. And then most importantly, I think that the reality is that one thing that other states have gotten right is that they have, at no cost, certified social equity applicants, right? So before the application process begins, I like to see a situation where you know that you're social equity and you're not wasting your time or money on an application process that's non-refundable plus the consultant fees. So I think that in itself will help. And then I think just more conversations like this. I mean, the reality is people understanding things okay, this license is valued at $10 million. Why am I, pimping myself out for 5% or a quick turnaround? These are the kind of discussions that we have to have. But I think if we do those things right, then we'll be fine in wave two. The other thing that I'm really looking forward to in wave two is set-aside licenses. It's something that the industry actually offered during negotiations, saying yo, we should give set-aside licenses for Black and brown folks. But it was kind of deemed something that might be unconstitutional based on using race in the law. There's all kind of case law out there on that. But I would love to see some type of goal that says like, all right, if we're awarding 100 licenses next time, and we only awarded 20 of the 75 to Black and brown folks this time, like let's see 50 next time, right? And let's keep building with people that can win the licenses and run successful businesses afterwards.
Right. And so one question before we move on and start taking question and answer, since Ron, since you were talking about problems with the program, I think one of the biggest problems that I want to hear about is the fact that all of these licenses have not been awarded to social equity applicants. For any of our people that are from the community there in Chicago, you know, what's the general tone like? What's the feeling like around that? And you know, what's the perspective from people that are on the ground there?
I mean, I'll go first. I mean, I'm not an applicant, so if this video shows up somewhere, like, I'm good. So trust me. The reality is that, you know, folks have been furloughed, they've been laid off. They're trying to make decisions about their lives, and the lack of certainty around this process is another goalpost that's been moved on folks that have been having the goalpost moved on them their entire lives, right? And at a time when we know that certain industries like retail, like hospitality, have high unemployment rates, we also know that just based on the numbers here in Illinois, like cannabis is flourishing. And the idea that folks can't participate in this retail business is actually hiring folks and actually paying them livable wages and insurance is really, I think, antithetical to the moment that we're in, especially as we talk about like investing in Black and brown communities. So I'm probably going to be like the harshest publicly on this, but like the administration has a huge problem by doing this. And, you know, at first I said that the who was more important than the when. And that was, you know, when I thought the licenses were going to be delayed 1 month, 2 months. But now we're talking about 4 months at least, probably add litigation on top of that. It's a huge problem.
Right, and a lot of revenue being made too that all the social equity people are missing out on. And so to look at some of the questions that we have from our audience, it looks like the most popular question was, how can social equity groups collaborate with HBCUs for research development as well as job development? I think I'll lead on that and say, I think one example is that you can take a look at Southern University. Dr. Shonda Messiah recently did a partnership with them for their brand, and they're now the first HBCU to be selling CBD and THC products. Personally, that's something that I would like to see more HBCUs participate in, because I think especially with a lot of them having roots in agriculture, it's a major opportunity to build wealth in our communities. Also, as a Howard University alum, I happen to believe that the best and brightest people in the world come from HBCUs. So I think if we start educating on cannabis through these HBCUs, it's going to be a game changer. And that's how we really get more of us in this industry as executives, as owners, and all different types of areas. And then I know also FAMU has a medical cannabis program. And Tennessee State also has like a research program. And I don't know, does anybody else know some other HBCUs that have some other perspective on that?
Well, I'm an HBCU guy, Philander Smith, Little Rock. One of the things I would say, just to add to that, is changing the game. Right, we have a lot of Black and brown, Howard, you know, everyone else that goes, and a lot of the students that, you know, that I work with and talk to that are Black and brown. Oh, I'm a business major. Okay, well, if you're putting the cannabis industry in HBCUs, that changes the game, because now it's a whole different venture that Black and brown communities know of cannabis, right? I was a traditional seller before it became regulated when I was back in the day. But the thing is coming up and changing that mindset and building that economic wealth using HBCUs and using a whole different platform of CEOs and economic development and looking at that industry in that way. So I agree with you with that one.
So I see there's like an HBCU roll call in the chat. Shout out to Morehouse, by the way.
Yeah, all right.
No, but I think this is important, but it's also important that like we get people in C-suite positions in the industry so they can bring that intel back, right? So there's a larger infrastructure issue that we face in this industry about decision makers taking their resources and then building additional infrastructure. So until we get, you know, alums that are running, you know, ancillary businesses or in licensed activities, then they can go down to campus and say like, yeah, I know you've got this STEM program, I want you to also think about this, right? Like I'm dedicating 2 or 3 interns at my place every year to somebody that comes from an HBCU. Like that's how we have to think about how we use this industry as a tool for economic empowerment.
Yeah, and just going off, not necessarily at HBCUs, but one thing I'm seeing here in Chicago is a lot of the city colleges. I didn't go to a city college, but I see a lot of the city colleges here now starting to offer courses on cannabis. And I think that's major as well, because some people don't even have the opportunities to travel outside. I mean, obviously Chicago does have, I think maybe Chicago State University is the only
Yeah,
one I'm
Chicago
thinking.
State's got some classes.
Yeah.
And then the Chicago community colleges are getting their curriculum done right now.
Yep.
And then Oakland Community College also has a ton of curriculum as well.
Yeah,
but again, like
also
we've got to explain to folks that you know, this exists and that maybe you're not ready to apply in wave 1. Maybe you should learn a little bit about the industry, have those credentials, and then bring those in, right? So like it's important.
Well, I think it's also important for the private sector to say, well, what can we do? Right? Not just leave it up to the historically Black colleges and universities or necessarily the public sphere to give this education, because the education is just not getting into communities. We're not in the churches. We're not in a lot of those places saying, hey, we offer a way for you to learn about this. Most of the consultants were like, hey, you got to come to our downtown office. We're going to pick and choose people, etc. So, you know, I would ask even participants here, what are you doing? Because when Christine and Annabelle and I were, you know, in Chicago, we're saying, look, here's free and discounted classes at a rate that is going to be able to help the people in this room understand the issue, get over those barriers, and otherwise get value out of themselves and what they can create for their generational wealth. So I think it's one thing to say, look, how can we always leverage the government to make this mandatory? But for those people that care about this issue out there that are in the private sector, we got to ask, what can we do for each other? Because a lot of times we're not going to get out of this bucket of crabs unless we're lifting each other out of it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's well put, Mark. I love the crab. I always love the crab analogy, the bucket of crabs analogy. It's a great
Latino culture, man, it's all too
I'm
real.
telling you.
one.
Right.
Yeah.
So just looking at a couple of these other questions here, I know we're running up against time here. I want to field a couple of these questions here. Chris Jensen from March Networks. Good to see you on here, Chris.
My man,
Good
Chris.
to see you. Absolutely. And so, you know, the question is, how can I best leverage my professional experience to assist social equity candidates prepare for the state application process or joining the industry in general? And I mean, that's, you know, we'll probably talk about that for the next like 3 hours. But, you know, in a quick snippet, I'll try to answer. There's of course a lot of different ways that people can get involved, right? You know, one is finding people that are doing the work, right? So talking with folks like Ron Holmes and the Minority Majority Group, right? You know, finding accelerator programs such as, you know, my program Boost, right? People that are doing that work with the social equity applicants directly. Another, you know, if you don't know social equity applicants yourself, finding people that work with them. Another thing to just bring up here, I'm going to throw a plug out here for the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee. But if you are an NCIA member, you have the ability to apply to be on a committee, and the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee, we're going to be doing a lot of work to really support social equity applicants over the next year and beyond. A big part of that will be in helping the implementation of the social equity scholarship program that Tahir mentioned at the beginning of the hour. So those are just some ways that I can think of off the top of my head. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add.
Real quick, I'm a member of a foundation that what we do is we help small nonprofit organizations sit at the table with larger philanthropic organizations. And how do we do that? We grab individuals from the community and say, hey, if you guys are small nonprofit organizations, we're going to meet up and bring these individuals into the community so they can do technical assistance and training. So those are one of the things that we can look at is as a group saying, okay, well, we're on the south side, Ron, you know, east side, west side, north side. Let's start creating town hall in the meetings and saying, okay, individuals that are thinking of social equity being an application or whatever it is, these are the type of communications we need to start having and type of technical assistance. So that way, if you don't make it in round 1, then let's prepare you for round 2 or let's prepare you for round 3. But at least we're coming into the community and they're seeing our faces in the community instead of saying, come to Wacker Avenue or Michigan Avenue.
Yeah, one thing I just wanted to add to that as well, I think that it can't be overstated the impact that ancillary businesses will have as well for people that are looking for ways to get in. If you already know you have an expertise in a certain field, then you just find your niche in cannabis with that and find ways to help those people in that way. Again, me as a realtor, I learned marketing in school, but so much from being a realtor over the last 10 years and just dealing with people that when I started to build my own company, WTF Media, initially I didn't even consider it to be I didn't even know the term ancillary business at the time. Like I wasn't even thinking of it in that way. I was just kind of doing a blog and kind of trying to figure out how to make some money off of it. And then it kind of steamrolled, and I met people like Kay at some of her great events, and some of the other people around Chicago that are doing really great things in the industry before I myself even was considering to apply for a license. So I kind of fell into it, all of it, but it really started off with me just using the skills that I already had, finding a way to apply it, and then everything kind of fell in its own right. And so I think a lot of times the people, some of it, obviously you need to educate yourself about the industry, but some of it is not overthinking it and just action and start doing things and just getting involved. And then you'll be surprised because it's such a brand new industry and there's so much opportunity in here, not only in Illinois, but just all over the country. You'll be surprised how quickly you can grow into something, and it won't be hard to find people who need your help and who need your expertise.
Yeah, and I think to Michael's point, there's just, like you said, everywhere. So a lot of states didn't think about this like Illinois did. So Colorado, I can count all the minority business owners I know on one hand, right? Less than 3% of people of color have any sort of marijuana business in the industry. So the question is, what do we do policy-wise? What do we do leadership-wise to make some of these privileged companies that already got a lot of money and aren't giving back to their communities, but they're going to go to Illinois and say they are, right? How do we get them to walk the walk in their starting places, in the places where they founded themselves?
And this is
There's no accountability or expectation there.
right, but this is literally where ancillary businesses become incredibly important, because there's a limited number of licenses in any of the areas, but there's unlimited ancillary businesses that can actually be stood up for way less money. You don't have to weigh a license. It's just a regular business. So what if you had a group of ancillary businesses that you've helped usher through, whether it's Illinois, California, New York, when it comes to that, and then the companies, because these are ancillary businesses run by social equity applicants that maybe didn't get one or would have qualified but didn't want to go that route, that they have a commitment to 30% of their buy comes from these ancillary businesses. 30% of whatever they buy, whether it's pipes or papers or stash boxes or whatever, comes from the ancillary businesses that have been stood up by social equity applicants who did not get a license or never wanted to get a license because they didn't want to go through the headache. And this is where communities have power. Ancillary communities have power. The communities that go to the dispensaries have power because they can demand that. They can be like, I'm in your dispensary, you have some really cool stuff. How much of this stuff comes from social equity applicants? How much of this stuff comes from Black and brown business owners? We have a lot of power, and we should use that power right now in this very moment. I mean, I've been advocating for this for years, but now is the time. This moment is a movement.
Right, and so I know we're getting close to our time, so I want to get last thoughts from everybody. I'll go in order. I'll go back and forth between some from the community and then some from NCIA. So first, Mike Malcolm, do you want to give some last thoughts before we wrap it up?
Yeah, just echoing everything that Christine was just saying. I think ancillary businesses. Again, I've had a ton of people ask me how I got into the industry from the very beginning, and so much of it was through my ancillary business that I didn't know even existed, and just the fact of just building relationships, and getting involved. And like I said, I'm just a do person. You can talk about what you want all day long, but it takes some initiatives to go out and do things when you don't know how it's going to turn out. You do things scared. You do things when you don't really know how it's going to end. But I think, especially in this industry, again, there's so much possibility possibility and so much opportunity that action is just needed, I think, for most part. And again, with this round, who knows how it's going to turn out, but I think that people just got to keep the fight and just stay on top of everyone, and we just see how it goes.
Yep, and we'll keep it with the mics. So Mike Lamuto, what last minute gems do you have to drop for us?
Yeah, I just, first off, I want to thank everybody for the awesome discussion. I think that the thing I would like to throw out there is that, cannabis prohibition and the war on drugs has gone on for a long time. And, we want a quick resolution. And I think that, we look at the state of Illinois right now, and, a lot of eggs are in the basket of what happens in that first round. But, that second round, that third round, that fourth round, creating ancillary businesses, creating a long-standing movement here is going to be what's really important for social equity applicants and for communities that have been impacted by the war on drugs. And, that's all. I'd just like to throw that in there.
Most definitely. And Annabelle, Reverend, do you have a closing word for us?
Well, one thing I will say is research, advocate, and collaborate. That's all I'm going to say. So if we research the information, if we advocate for policies that are going to benefit our communities and build our industry and our Black and brown brothers and sisters, and if we just advocate and fight, that's what we got to do, and collaborate with each other. No Moses here. Everyone can't be Moses. Somebody got to be Joshua once in a while. So.
Yeah, I'm glad you got to close it with a little bit of the gospel in there for us, man. And then, so Mark, how about you, man? What's your last closing perspective?
For people to stay tuned, I think it was really great having the NCIA leadership, really say, look, out of all the committees, and we've only been around for 1 year as the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee, we have put together, thanks to Mike, Christine, a lot of hard work from the rest of our community members, really at a national level advocating for this. Now, sort of being elected to the Policy Council for NCIA and interweaving this conversation into what's happening nationally. Just stay tuned. This is only a beginning with Illinois, and every single state can either retroactively get on board with, I think, this movement that has been a long time coming, but that 3% of ownership needs to go up, and we need to definitely have more participation, more allies in this movement to make it happen. So stay tuned. I think we've got a lot of great plans ahead, and a lot of great people up to some pretty great things.
Right. And Kay, what are the last important things you think people should know?
I think keep educating yourself, but be mindful of all the information you're receiving. Go with your gut when it comes to speaking with people, finding the right partners. And regardless of all the failures that we've all learned from this program, don't lose hope. We're all in this together. Let's continue the conversation. And I think it's also important to say that we need to also continue to preserve the culture of cannabis, especially in Chicago.
Right. And Ron, last but not least, man, bring us home. You're from Chicago, so I know you got that last minute Jordan flu game shot for us.
No, look, we're at the very beginning of a new industry here in Illinois that I'm very excited about. No matter what happens in this licensing round, we're not going to get everything right. We've got a long way to go. There are no minority owners here today. So be patient, and then whatever you do well in whatever industry you're in currently, bring that to Illinois, because our cannabis industry needs it, whether or not it's ancillary, whether or not it's licensed. We have to start building out the infrastructure that's going to sustain our communities long term.
Definitely. And I appreciate all of our panelists for sharing all of your wealth of information with us. Appreciate everybody that came out to watch. Thanks for coming out. And just one last announcement for the Social Equity Scholarship Program. Any social equity licensees or applicants out there, make sure you apply to cannabisindustry.org/equity. Stay tuned for all the people that have already applied. Stay tuned for more announcements about the program. We're looking forward to working with all of y'all, and I'll kick it back to my man, Brian, to close it out.
Hey, Tariq, can I, one more thing really quick?
Just
really quick. Lawyer up, people. Please, lawyer up. Get your paperwork in order, because you can win that license and lose and have nothing within a few months. So just lawyer up. That's just, the last little thing I meant to add.
Man, those are great last words, and I think everybody should pay attention to that. Lawyer up all the way. That's the hashtag to close it out.
Oh, I was muted. Yeah, thank you, Michael, for those closing remarks. I saw you post that in the chat room, and I'm glad that we could give you the mic back to make sure that that got across to the audience. So let's give a humongous virtual round of applause. If you enjoyed today's session, raise your hand in the audience pool. Let us know that you had a great experience. Oh, always love seeing my screen fill up with that. Wow, that was the first time my entire screen filled up. Awesome. So yeah, post in the chat room, let them know what the best piece of information that you're taking away from today's session is. I know that I took a lot away from today's session, so I can only imagine for people that are actually involved in the industry on a day-to-day basis in those direct-to-plant touching businesses really found this information valuable. So thank you so much to all of our panelists for contributing their time. We do want to close this session out today by just previewing some upcoming sessions, hoping that you'll continue your engagement with NCIA's online educational offerings by joining us for the next 2 editions of our weekly Industry Essentials webinar series. Next week on Wednesday, July 22nd, we'll be presenting a session conducted by members of NCIA's Advisory Committee, featuring some special guests from the United States Pharmacopoeia. This session is entitled, "What are Standard Development Organizations and How Will They Shape Federal and Global Cannabis Policy?" In it, leaders from relevant standards development organizations will give updates on the work being done in their cannabis working groups, and they will also explain how their work complements NCIA's and how you can get more involved with their efforts. Then following that on August 12th, we'll be presenting the 2nd edition of our new Service Solutions series of webinars. This time, this benefit rolled out by NCIA this summer, NCIA Connect. NCIA Connect is an online community for NCIA members to engage in thoughtful discussion and learn from other cannabis industry professionals while enjoying exclusive access to important industry resources and members-only content. This webinar will include a guided walkthrough through some of the key features of the platform from members of NCIA's marketing team, and you'll leave it by learning more about this new member benefit and find out how it can positively impact your business. As with today's session, this webinar is free for both NCIA members as well as non-members to attend. So if you haven't already, please head to NCIA's website to sign up today and invite as many of your colleagues who might be interested in joining as well. Then finally, I'm going to activate a quick poll for everybody. Again, I would love as much engagement with this as well. We noticed during the icebreaker poll that about 50% of the audience did state that they were not currently NCIA members. I do want to stress that becoming an NCIA member is the first way that you can link into the NCIA community outside of these public-facing educational events and other resources that we provide publicly. And it's the best way that you can support NCIA's vital community building, advocacy efforts, and educational offerings now here in the digital realm. In addition, we also have a number of sponsorship opportunities surrounding all of our digital marketing platforms that are going to provide you the real exposure and ROI that all of us are lacking in these pandemic days. Along those lines, as was the highlight of today's program, we do need your support to ensure that the Equity Scholarship Program is a success. While providing memberships to Equity Scholarship applicants is something that we are very interested in doing, it is not something that comes free of charge. We do need to support the amount of staff and volunteers that we're going to be coordinating surrounding this program. So I highly encourage you to join the NCIA Equity Scholarship Benefactor Program by reaching out to Tahir Johnson to tell him about how you can support the program financially and ensure that it is a successful program as we continue to roll it out. As I'm sure all of you all know, the rollout of programs is just as important as the intent behind them, as I think we all learned today. So please know that this program will not be a success without your support. Additionally, if financial support isn't something that you're capable of at the moment, we really want your expertise. We also have mentorship opportunities that we're going to be providing, and Tahir will be running a incubator style program to provide support and expertise to all of the program applicants. So if you aren't able to be a benefactor, please do reach out to Tahir and offer your support as a mentor for the program so that you can help ensure that this vital component of our DEI work is successful going into the new year. All right. And then let me close this poll real quick. All right, perfect. Thank you all for responding to that. All of you all that responded, you are being interested in becoming an NCIA member, will be contacted by our business development team following this webinar, and will be contacted personally if you expressed interest in sponsorship opportunities. So really appreciate that. Now, finally, Thank you all so much for participating in another Industry Essentials educational webinar. Huge thanks to all of our panelists. You can see all of their company logos displayed there along the bottom of the screen. Our huge thanks to our audience members, and a special shout out to all the NCIA member businesses which participated in today's session and made our work possible. Please complete the attendee survey after leaving the meeting room. Doing so will gain you immediate access to our presentation and exclusive 30-day access to a formatted video recording sent directly to your email inbox. As I noted in the chat room, we will be establishing a private members-only community inside of NCIA Connect to continue the conversation surrounding this program. We'll address all of the outstanding questions within inside that forum, so we definitely encourage all of you all to jump into NCIA Connect to continue the conversation around this topic. And then additionally, the conversation from that forum will then be condensed down into a public blog, so all of you all who aren't NCIA members currently can get a follow-up on today's session. So I hope you all have a wonderful week. I look forward to seeing you all again next time for another NCIA Industries Essential webinar. We'll leave you all with this end of event credit sequence highlighting all of the 75 plus member businesses that participated in this afternoon's webinar, featuring some audio stylings by our resident musician at our Colorado-based events and Chicago native, KJ Lease. So with that, stick around for the next minute. If you see your member business in the end of event credit sequence, raise your hand up, and we look forward to seeing you all next week. Thanks so much.